Hi everyone, my name is Lavish Collectibles. This is my first YouTube video. However, I am not new to the space. Been making content for years across different platforms, but also have been pretty engaged in the market for a little under a decade. But the reason I'm making this video is my concerns for the market have been at an all-time high. Like, I am literally very scared people will lose money. And this isn't some video I'm trying to create a bunch of fear and panic. I don't think we are at that stage yet, but I think how I can offer my best services with this video is just kind of prepare you so that you don't, make mistakes or end up losing money, because I don't like to see people, get hurt, basically. And I think we're reaching a point where it's getting pretty dangerous. Couple things. I'm going to be reading from my phone a lot because I don't do this kind of content really. I just had to speak my mind because I've been engaged with the market for a long time. So I'm going to be reading off my phone a lot. So I hope you don't mind. I suggest just tuning in on the car ride. That's what I do for a lot of these market watch videos. I just tune in on the car ride, listen to them, kind of like a podcast. So hopefully we do something like that today. But I've been really dealing since 2019 heavily, right? I've been engaged with Pokemon in the space since obviously its inception, right? And I've been basically casually into it, but I got seriously into it around 2019. I've worked with large businesses in the space and also independently grew my own business. Look, I'm scared for the market, and like other creators who are here to scare people, like I said earlier, I'm going to provide lots of context. I feel like a lot of these videos I see on YouTube are just scratching the surface, and I am not here to scratch the surface. I'm here to give you the details that you might not want to hear, but you'll be ready for it, okay? But we got to first, in order to do this, we got to figure out what put us in this position, like what caused us to be where we are today, right? So what kind of started this hype, I think, was Pokemon Pocket. A lot of people might tie that to the reason why this hype bubble started. So Pokemon Pocket comes out, a lot of people get introduced to it. They start seeing how fun it is to rip packs. And people start wanting to actually get physical products. So stuff like 151, Prismatic, etc. Modern cards then start to boom. Rip and ships take off. And they existed before, but it wasn't to the extent that it is now, right? There was big brands, obviously, with distribution that would do these rip and ships, but they were nowhere near the scale they're happening at today. But yeah, so these rip and ships happen, and people start to realize, well, hey, if I just go to my local Walmart, Target, or GameStop and just clean out all the inventory, I can double my money, right? And products start to become scarce. It starts to feel like every time there is a drop, or a restock or anything, products just immediately disappear, right? So more people come in, and these are the scalpers. And scalpers is not like how you guys typically define scalpers. I define scalpers as people who honestly don't really care much about the Pokemon hobby or really were ever in it. These are like the sneakerhead people. And look, no hate towards these people, but they're coming in, they're bringing in their bots, they are cleaning out the Pokemon Center online, they're going to Target. These are the never had a job people, basically, as some people call it. But yeah, so, and I mean, they flip everything, right? They flip everything for double on Facebook Marketplace or OfferUp, right? But so when this arbitrage kind of exists, it greatly impacts the market. FOMO happens. People start overpaying on product. That's generally not worth that. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute. And it greatly impacts markets like vintage. And we will discuss that too. You're probably thinking, how does, Journey Together impact vintage? We will talk about that today. And continuing on the history part, right, there was the whole Costco Blooming Waters. I think that was one of the big pivotal moments in the space. I was there for that. I literally went to a Costco. I actually went to a Costco that was probably the most famous one because it went viral on social media because people were literally, jumping each other. They were basically just a hair short from throwing punches. They were wrestling. It was chaotic. It felt like, something you would see in I don't even know, post-apocalyptic movie when people are trying to scavenge for food. It was it was scary to be a part of that. And then, fast forward to December and January, that's when vintage cards start to see that tick. They start to come up. Modern cards, like stuff like with the Surging Sparks era and stuff, there was, cards starting to go up in that with regards to modern 151, Surging Sparks. But December, January, like around the time right before and right around Prismatic's release, that's when we started to see vintage boom. But yeah, so here are the issues, right? We're going to go into now the details, okay? There's multiple factors as to why I think the market's going to start crashing, okay? And let's start with one that actually nobody talks about. Like, I watched a lot of these videos on YouTube, but no one really talks about this in this particular way. Pokemon vending, okay? It goes without saying that vending has completely exploded in popularity, okay? Before 2024, vending definitely existed. Collecticon obviously existed, stuff like that, front row card show, whatever, card party, I don't know, right? All this stuff existed. However, what was crazy was the amount of vendors, right? Significantly less. I did a lot of buy, selling, and trading primarily online, right? With big companies, big brands, with, millions of dollars of inventory. So I was, directly speaking to a lot of the people in the community, a lot of the people, buying, selling, trading. And to be honest, it was a small community, like of dealers, right? There was, I would say maybe like 10 to 20 dealers on Facebook. And like, at the conventions, obviously there were more people, right, than 10 to 20. But when I say 10 to 20, I mean like, relevant. And I don't mean relevant in like a, oh, you're not relevant. But like these guys had like a decent sized inventory, of, I don't know, let's say 100K plus, right? But yeah, so these were like the more big established vendors. There was very few of them, okay? And, I just need to make it very clear that I think it's awesome that, these conventions have gotten as popular as they have, and the hobby, transformed into like it's really cool actually, like that we can go to a convention and there's just hundreds of people who are just so interested. There's hundreds of vendors. It's a cool experience. And it's kind of transformed to this idea where everyone thinks, I can make Pokemon a business. And this is by no means a way to jab or discourage like people following your dream. Like, definitely go for that. That is like the coolest thing ever, right? And I stand for it 100%. But I think, if you're passionate about it, go for it. I got to make that disclaimer very clear because people are going to be like, oh, screw you, blah, blah, blah. But here's where I start to think it gets problematic with the vending, okay? Before the last boom, most vendors were paying 70 to 75% on inventory, sometimes more, spending on like a quality card, let's say a Gold Star PSA 10, right? And I'm not here to like debate vendors squeezing value. For reference, brick and mortar shops, like you go to a card shop, they often offer like 60% or worse. But liquidity, like how difficult it was to sell a card, was a lot lower 1 to 2 years ago. Even for desirable cards, like even Gold Stars, PSA 10s, they didn't just fly off the shelf. PSA 9 Gold Stars, they didn't just fly off the shelf. They were popular, but you'd probably sit on them for like a couple weeks at a time, months even, depending on how bullish you were for selling it. So demand was lower, therefore, liquidity was lower. But as this boom started to happen, vendors started to undercut one another, okay? Buying at 80%, buying at 85%, buying at 90%, and even buying at 100%, Many of them posting on Instagram stories or Facebook saying like, cash ready, 250K budget, willing to spend it by this week, for reference in 2023, if I made a Facebook post saying buying at 80%, I'd literally have like 50 to 100 people in the comments, trying to sell me stuff, all of different qualities, most of it not that good, but you would have a lot of interest, right? Now, I'd be lucky if I make a post on Facebook saying buying at 80%, maybe I'll get a couple guys with some random CGC cards, right? It's not what it used to be. And that concept of like buying at 90%, 250K ready to spend this weekend, like I was saying, wasn't something that existed at all pre-2025. There was big fish. There were some big fish in the space, but like it was not happening like at this kind of level, at least through my scope and lens. And I'm not critiquing any specific people or like how their business model is. I'm just saying what I'm seeing, right? Vending obviously works best like the larger the inventory you have, right? The more variety, the more potential buyers, the more sales, blah, 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 blah. The more sales, the more money, right? But y'all are forgetting the more inventory equals the more leveraged you are, right? So let's say 85 to 90%, for example. What happens when demand starts to drop? Okay. Because it does. It does. I know you're not going to I know a lot of you are like, don't believe me here, but it does, It happened in 2021 during the hype during COVID. It happened in 2000, after like when base set first came out, the hype for Pokemon was insane, like crazy, different than it is now, different than it was in 2020. But, they were releasing great sets, like by like 2003, 2004, Skyridge, there were all-time lows for the hobby, right? Like no one was that really interested. Like the sets were printed at an all-time low because demand was at an all-time low. But if you look back, sets like Skyridge, are like fantastic. So this claim that just because a set is, amazing or stacked doesn't mean like the hype can last just set after set after set, The reality is, that's just not how hobbies work, okay? People get fatigue, right? Whether it's spending too much, not being able to find product, or sets releasing one after the other, not giving people, the opportunity to finish collecting the set they were already collecting. Like, let's be real for a second. Pokemon can't produce a banger after banger set, especially with an upcoming generation after Mega. Like, do you really think Mega Evolution or Phantasmal Flames has more hype behind it than Prismatic did? Like, seriously, me and you. Do you really think it does, right? And not that it has to, but I think a lot of people here on the internet are trying to make it seem like it does, or trying to make people buy into it, like as if it were like just as hyped, right? Do you think, it has more hype than like Destined Rivals had? For reference, Destined Rivals had like hype for like the idea of Destined Rivals, like a year before it was even like conceived, right? People were like rumoring Team Rocket set. There was a lot of hype behind that. You're going to tell me Journey Together or Mega Evolution had that kind of hype behind it, that anticipation? I just don't think so. And I'm not here claiming that Mega or Phantasmal Flames are like mid sets or anything. They're great, but let's be real, the hype train just can't last forever, right? Look at, just go back to WotC, right? Great sets, Gym, Introduction Challenge, they got the Johto stuff, you got the Neo, you got the Expedition, Aquapolis, Legendary Collection. Those you would think are like fantastic sets, at least in retrospect, but demand was at an all-time low. It's just because it's like you can't keep hype always, right? Imagine it's like going to a restaurant, right? And saying like, it's my birthday, right? It's a special occasion. I'm going to order like a A5 Wagyu steak. And oh my gosh, it is like absolutely delicious. It's tasty. You really savor it. It's amazing, okay? Next day, you go to the restaurant again, order A5 Wagyu steak, right? This is delicious, amazing. Next day, you have lobster. Next day, you have, I don't even know, right? Like beef Wellington. After a while, you're going to get fatigue from all this, super rich kind of food, right? It doesn't matter if like the quality's up here. You are going to get fatigued from it. And that's kind of how sets are, right? The hype train just cannot last forever. Anyways, sorry, I don't want to go on too many tangents. I'm trying to keep myself accountable here on the phone. But anyways, circling back, let's say the market drops 10%, okay? Just as an example. And for these vendors, right? They have a lot of costs that, some of these vendors, they're really transparent. They say, hey, this is how much I paid for this blah, blah, blah. This is how much I made by the end of the weekend. I think that's pretty cool. But I don't think it's as glorified as people make it out to be, right? So you toss in like hotel fees, table fees, and flights, and let's say market goes down 10%, and you're buying at 90%, right? Suddenly you're upside down. Literally, you're upside down, right? And that doesn't include all the time, you spent sourcing and vending at the event. Like between the travel and the time vending, you're probably spending 25 to 30 hours per event, right? So for like a weekend, usually 2 days, 16 hours, sometimes it's travel, right? Like, and then there's hotel accommodations. It's just, you end up spending a lot of time. And if you're, let's say, buying at 90% and the market dips 10%, right? You are, basically right there, just at that line. And then you subtract all those costs. And I think that's when stuff starts to happen. And, I have to reiterate, I'm not taking into account the fun, of interacting with the community and like friends. I'm speaking purely from a business perspective because right now the amount of vendors, it's starting like a business thing, right? It's not just all fun and like, and it is fun, but it's a lot of business, right? So what happens when it dips 20%, right? Or even more? You can see where I'm going, right? Let me illustrate a situation on how this can all begin to crumble, okay? The hobby operates on a vague form of proportionality, okay? And what do I mean by this? Basically, in some form, people use many different indicators to determine something's value, okay? A big one being, how does something compare to something else, right? So let's say people start to see 151 Charizard begin to drop in price. That then makes people reassess the value of like the Venusaur from 151 or the Blastoise from 151. Even if those cards didn't receive a lower comp, what's going to end up happening is they're going to assume that the card, is falling in price because in relation to the 151 Charizard, for example. See, like there isn't like a specific ratio you can use. There isn't like a specific equation you can use to compare one card's value to another. But like basically the best way I could put it is that the more seasoned you are, the less you need to actually see a comp, right? To generally understand, something's value. I personally notice it a lot in high end. Like for example, when a high end card performs poorly or it's hard to sell, aka like it's low liquidity, that speaks more, to the health of the entire market than you'd imagine. So basically, in short, high supply cards, when demand starts to slow down, it will be a race to the bottom. And of course, I have to specify, not zero. That does not mean it's going down to zero, right? I have to say that because people will try to take me out of context. But those cards will, affect vintage, low pop, high pop. It doesn't matter. It all dominoes, right? And it's because of this idea of like the proportions, right? You start comparing, 151 Charizard, it's going down. Well, then the Bubble Mew's overvalued, right? Okay, well, the Bubble Mew's overvalued. Well, this is overvalued. And it starts to really, the wheel really starts to go and snowballs, right? And it works in the opposite direction as well. Obviously, that's how the market boomed up. But I need to remind people, it works in the negative direction as well, right? But let's also chat about, what you see at these vendors' booths, right? You see a lot of modern sealed product like booster boxes. You see modern slabs and you see vintage too, but we'll talk more about vintage later, okay? At an event, let's just, we're just estimating right now. We're just kind of talking out random numbers, right? Let's pretend there's 50 tables, okay? Sometimes I'm sure there's more, but let's just say there's 50 tables. And at 30 of these tables, there's vendors with a PSA 10, 151 Charizard, okay? I want to know, like genuinely, what makes your copy special, okay? Maybe it's a sequential cert. Maybe it's got like a swirl. Well, there's no swirl on 151 Charizard, but maybe you're easy to work with. Maybe you're a nice person, right? Those are all important things, right? But let's cut that part out for now, okay? What makes yours special? What makes your 151 Charizard PSA 10 that you're trying to sell special? What's making someone decide to go buy yours? Like maybe, you dropped yours 5% to secure a sale, right? Because you're competing with 30 plus people at that event who's also got the exact same card listed for the exact same price, right? So when demand starts to drop, this is an important thing to note. Buyers start to disappear, obviously, right? But when buyers start to disappear, the buyers that are left, oh man, and I can speak on this because I've done this kind of stuff before. They start to get pickier, okay? What do I mean by this? I've sold with other people before, like $2 million inventories and such, and during the last boom and during the crash. So I've been here from the ups and the downs, right? People get pickier. And on cards with like many copies, you need to stand out, okay? And I know that the current business model for these vendors to some extent, is working, right? Or else they wouldn't be doing it, yeah? But they're operating on the basis of current conditions that when something starts to drop, right? Like when things start to drop, probably inevitably, the profits will disappear and people will start taking major losses, right? Like I was saying earlier, those people that say, I buy it 100%, I buy it 90%, spending 500K by this weekend, right? The market starts to drop. What happens, right? It's crazy. It's wild. But why would they take losses? Because they're fully invested in it, right? They're fully leveraged. And I think it's great that, you're building your business, every dollar you make, you're putting back into it and it's growing and growing. And I've really seen a lot of these businesses grow. I don't know how much they started with capital wise in terms of deploying it and then, growing it. But like a lot of these inventories you see these days from these vendors are 6-figure inventories, right? Which did not really exist before. But at the same time, it means you're leveraged in, right? And if market drops, your inventory, is going to be worth less. And if you bought it at too high of a price, you will suffer the consequences, right? It's kind of a scary thing. And, as a business, you can't just say, well, I'm going to diamond hands it through, because there's moments where it could be years, right? So does that mean you're just not going to go to any more conventions, right? Like, are you just going to stop going to conventions until the market goes back up and you're just going to hold it for years and years? Or are you going to, go to the conventions and market's going to be dropped and now you're selling things at a loss? Then you factor in the time, that you spend going to them, right? You factor in the costs of like tables, hotels, food, flights, accommodations. It starts to become pretty bad pretty quick with those business models, There's this concept. I hope you guys are enjoying the video, by the way. Like this is a new thing for me. Maybe it's kind of awkward. I don't know. I just wanted to chat. I want to get my thoughts, give you guys my thoughts on the market. And this is all just kind of off the dome, right? I have like my notes, but hope you guys are enjoying it. But continuing on, there's this concept called the greater fool theory. Nobody talks about it. I've actually seen one other guy, shout out Sal, mention this, but literally almost no one talks about this concept. And I think it's so important because with collectibles, value is really hard to pinpoint, right? You have like comps and then you have just, and we'll talk more about that later, but we have this process or this idea called the greater fool theory, right? And essentially what it is you can make a profit buying an overpriced asset because you can always find someone to pay higher for it, right? Do you think a card that, do you think a card, that 4 to 5x in the last 6 months, is its true intrinsic value, right? Let's say like for some of these gold stars, right? I saw like Gold Star Torchic, like a Japanese 10. It's like a $6,000 card. Now it's like 30K, right? Do you truthfully believe that like at 30K, that's its true intrinsic value? Or was it closer to that 6K amount, right? Or, you know what I'm saying? It's wild, right? So that's what I'm personally struggling with, right? A lot in this market is I see a lot of cards based on intrinsic value, right? Of course, you can look at alt, you can see at these comps and you can see, oh, wow, this is a lot higher, right? But if you take that out of the equation and you just try to look at the card, look at how rare it is and try to understand its intrinsic value and put it into perspective, I think you'll be surprised that you might find a lot of cards are currently very overvalued, right? I was just discussing that Torchic example, like 6,000, now it's going for 30,000, right? To the person buying it for like $30,000 plus, ignoring the emotional aspect, of like, this is my dream card, I've been wanting this card since I was a kid, all that stuff, right? And let's just put it straightly like to an investment perspective. Like to the buyer of that 30,000 card, right? Do you feel confident that that card's intrinsic value is $30,000, right? That's my question. One more concept I wanted to discuss regarding vendors. There's also this mentality going around where people say something like, I started this with $10,000 of my outside money, but now the business is worth $100,000. So if it dips by like 50%, it's all free. I'm still up. That's what people say. And well, yes, but like, let's take this outside the scope of Pokemon, for example, right? For a second. What business actually says that, right? Like, I get from a collector perspective of, like, growing your collection with the money you already have invested in it, and it doesn't really matter if it falls because it's all for fun. I get that, right? But as a business, that literally doesn't make any sense, okay? If you're okay with taking a 50% hit because your initial investment was less, you are devaluing your own time and effort, right? Like, it doesn't make sense. Hours spent sourcing, hours spent traveling, hours spent vending. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts on that in the comments. Okay, jumping to the next segment, sealed product. So we're talking about these little pillars, right? So we talked about vending, right? How it's completely oversaturated right now, how people are undercutting each other, and it's going to be problematic because I don't think that business model is going to really be able to stand the test of time and be able to weather like a storm of, like, a crash, whether it's a huge crash, whether it's a 25% dip, whatever it is, their margins are pretty razor thin, especially when you factor in stuff like hotel fees and everything. But let's talk about sealed product, okay? There's a lot of content creators here talking about investing in sealed long term. And while I do appreciate the idea of like holding for the long term, it simply isn't going to work, okay? Let's be 100% real for a second, right? Let's take Fusion Strike. That's probably my favorite set to talk about. Fusion Strike boxes right now are like, I don't know, like $1,000 a box, like 900 to 1,000. Let's just say $1,000 a box. Okay. But did you guys know that before this like boom, like I'm talking like October, September of 2024, maybe even November of 2024, a ton of these Sword and Shield boxes and product was like still up on the Pokemon Center that you could just buy at MSRP in like the cases, right? Like, but they didn't used to have like limits back in the day where you can only buy one box. Like you could buy 6 at a time. They'd ship you a case, right? And I remember because there was like people on, Instagram stories or YouTube who would track. It's like, oh, wow, there's 30,000 boxes of Lost Origin left, right? They're the supplies, going out, it's dwindling, right? Or Fusion Strike. Okay. But these boxes were in the tens of thousands of quantity after the set releases. Like, when does a set get opened most? When it first comes out, right? Like after that, it dramatically takes a downturn in like how much it gets opened, right? There's of course outliers like 151, Prismatic, but let's just use Fusion Strike for example, okay? And let's be honest, okay? I know we're doing a lot of this, like let's be honest here, real talk. But let's be honest here. How many people, and let's even throw in rip and shippers, okay, are advertising like a Fusion Strike box break? Like, who? Like, and if there are people, please send them to me and say, Lavish, you are so wrong about this. Fusion Strike boxes, like, that's one of the most in-demand boxes to rip right now. Who's actually opening these boxes, okay? It's wild. Like, let me ask you this. Did you buy one for your birthday? Maybe you treated yourself and you're like, I'm going to treat myself to a Fusion Strike box that I'm going to go rip, okay? Yeah, me neither. I didn't do it either. Unless you hit the Gengar, right, which is extremely unlikely, like the pull rates for those sets are horrible. And there was that whole fiasco with like stolen copies. I don't know how it ended up being resolved, but there was a lot of missing good cards, right? So people were not pulling a lot out of these packs. But, you can look at the pull rates. It's like an instant loss if you don't pull the top chase, right? So why would you be inclined to open these boxes? And why am I talking about opening boxes, right? People are like, well, people buy it because it's a collectible. Just the box itself is a collectible. Obviously, yes, I understand that. People collect sealed boxes. They display it, on their shelves. It looks cool. I get that, the ETBs. But the whole concept behind sealed product and like why it goes up in value is this idea that, it's a dwindling resource, right? Like that boxes are disappearing because people open the boxes. And when one box gets opened, that's one less on the market, right? But do you really think, and if we're just using Fusion Strike for example, I could go to Paradox Rift or something like that, and it's like we can really laugh about it. But do you really think Fusion Strike boxes are getting opened in the quantity where like the box supply is dwindling? Like I've seen photos with people who have cases upon cases upon cases of this stuff, right? This is not a scarce box. It's not a box that is very rare, right? $1,000 for a box, it should be pretty rare. It should be, it should be a great set. And I'm not hating on the set as like, as a set, but I'm just hating on the value of it. I think it's severely overvalued, right? Especially considering how many boxes actually exist in the wild. Okay. Just looking at my notes more. Oops. Did I just delete that? Nope. Okay. Sorry guys. I was a little lost there for a second. This is what you get with the podcast version of the video. But yeah, so obviously I gotta keep saying this because there are gonna be people who take me out of context, right? Obviously there's Fusion Strike packs that are being open, but these are not packs from booster boxes, okay? Why? The rip and ship people, right? They want to get product for as cheap as possible to sell to people, right? A booster box carries a premium. Why would someone buy Fusion Strike packs from a booster box, right? And say, I'm gonna buy a booster box to rip open, then just buy loose packs to sell on the stream. So I don't deny that. I'm sure Fusion Strikes get ripped on these rip and ships, but it's definitely not boxes. And if there are boxes that are getting ripped, it's not in this mass quantity where it's this dwindling resource. It's crazy. Let me give you some, just personal anecdotes, like my own kind of experiences, okay? A lot of people, are carrying, like they're buying cases, they're stashing it away. They feel like, oh my gosh, I've got like a bunker. Look at this big wall of stuff. And it's cool. I was this close to being like caught on that bandwagon. And I kind of slapped myself a little bit. I'm like, no, what am I thinking, right? Do you know how hard it is to actually sell a sealed case of booster boxes? Okay. And I'm going to go back to a pre-hype time, like 2023, because right now it's not normal market conditions, right? And if you're buying these to hold for like a couple years and you want to flip and the market is not crazy hot, you're going to be in for a massive surprise. So like during 2023, maybe even early 2024, I don't remember, I had a case, like a sealed case of Evolving Skies boxes, okay? And I wanted to sell the case, right? I had to break the case down into individual boxes in order to sell it. I wasn't selling it over market. I was selling it fair, maybe even slightly below market, just to secure the sale, but I was really not getting interest. And when I say like, not getting interest, obviously Evolving Skies is a very popular set, but the demand wasn't there. I was marketing it on Facebook, Instagram, and I'm very well connected, right? It was like a kind of a surprising experience, right? And so what do I have to do? I had to, split it into boxes, right? Individual boxes, sell them one by one. And even on top of that, to really secure these sales, I had to throw in those little acrylics, those $10 to $15 acrylic boxes that you kind of use for display. So that's kind of what I was talking about earlier. How are you setting yourself apart, right? You're probably giving a little bit of a discount. You're probably throwing in acrylic, and all those things start to hit into your margins, right? All those things, if you take a dip in the profits, it starts to get pretty problematic, okay? And people are hoarding this stuff. I was talking about that. Do you know how long it will take to like sell your, like boxes? Let's say your position. Let's say you have 10 cases of, let's go back to Fusion Strike. Do you know how long that takes? Unless you're, fire selling it to like, another dealer at like 60, 70, 80%, whatever, right? No one's going to just say, oh yeah, 10 cases, sure, I'll buy it. It's not like a stock on the stock market where you just hit sell and then you just get the money. And, it's insane. And people, I think, are believing like it is like this, this asset where it's like, I buy this. But when you're going to get to the point of when you actually need to sell it, you're going to be widely surprised because most people are not really connected to the point where they could just sell stuff at full market value. It's not an easy thing. You have to develop a following. You have to have clients. It takes a lot of time. So a lot of people, where do they go? They go to places like eBay. They go to TCG Player. And we're going to talk about TCG Player right now. It's with the boxes going on. It's insane. Like the craziest part is that there's this idea that somehow TCG Player is like the source for people to know like how scarce or abundant like booster boxes are. Okay. And this logic is like so flawed on so many so many levels, right? You see these content creators, and I'm not hating on any of these people. I respect the hustle. It's do you, right? But I'm just calling out like what I think is crazy, okay? They think like TCG Player is the number one source that determines like how rare boxes are because how many are listed on eBay. Do you want to know why there are listed on TCG? You want to know why there's not that many boxes listed on like TCG Player? And when I say not that many, you know what I mean. It's not like two. I shouldn't have to be that, but sometimes you have to be like that particular with people. Do you know why people don't post that many boxes on TCG? It's like a small fraction of the reality of how many boxes there are. It's because when you sell on TCG Player, you're getting hit with fees. You're getting hit with like $15 to $20 to ship the box. And then like the profits start to go down. And if you bought it at a certain price, why would you list it at a loss, right? It's crazy. And then these like channels, right, that are like investment channels, they'll try to convince you like, oh, Journey Together, Paradox Rift, they're running out on TCG Player. There's only 4 boxes left until it hits like this next all-time high, right? Right now, there's only 4 boxes left at 200, and the next available price is 250. So it might be your chance to secure them before it's too late. Really? You really don't think there's more boxes of, Paradox Rift that I'm sure people would love to sell, right? It's honestly lunacy. But once again, what happens when the market dips 10 to 20%? What happens when you want to sell that Paradox Rift booster box? What makes yours special? Why buy it from you? Are you going to give a discount on it? Like compared to the thousands of others that people want to sell, like why would someone want to buy yours? Once again, I'll tell you how. I'll tell you how you can get someone to buy yours. You drop the price. You undercut people. And then the price starts to fall, right? But, when back on this topic of sealed, when that arbitrage of like Target, you go to Target and you just buy out all the stock, or go to Pokemon Center and you buy out, whatever new set release is. When those buyouts, start to disappear, the product is going to return to the people who actually want to buy it. And, they're going to stop overpaying for packs, right? And honestly, and it's going to happen, trust me, because like I said before, the hype, you just can't sustain hype for that long. And this is a horrible example, but look at Labubus, right? There was so much hype for them. Where's like the hype for them now? Like, yeah, it's cool, right? But that's obviously, I can't compare apples to oranges, but it's just kind of like an example. I hope you can kind of understand my logic. You can't sustain hype. I kind of talked about it earlier with, 1999, great sets, but you can't sustain it. 2020, you can't sustain it. It's not sustainable. They're going to also increase the printing, right? Let's be real about that. Oh, man. But, it's like a natural, human response for, when things are no longer, available. Like, oh my gosh, I want to get in on this. This is cool. Like it's hard to find. I really want to get it. It makes it feel like exclusive. It makes it feel like when you do get it, it's extra special, right? Like when Temporal Forces or Paradox Rift, and I like Temporal Forces, but when those sets were just on the shelves of Target, like in the packs by the like 50 packs, per little line, right? No one really cared that much, right? With Paldea Evolve, Obsidian Flames, nobody really cared that much, right? And there was people, obviously, there was like true collectors who were definitely still into it. They'd buy their packs, but like it wasn't at the level. A lot of the people who are buying the stuff right now, honestly, are like romanticize this kind of like exclusivity. It's hard to get. And once that like exclusivity, and like stuff starts to become more abundant on the shelves of like Target, Walmart, people are going to feel less like, this is whatever. I can just find this is dime a dozen. It's not that special. I don't really care. And they're going to move on, right? A lot of like, bigger collectors in terms of like high-end collections, right? They started really getting into modern because it became cool, right? It became like the thing that everyone wants to do. But when that starts to, relax, a lot of those people are going to leave because they're in it for like those, I want to do it because it's trendy kind of thing, right? And it's normal human like psychology, right? But this is how I see things playing out, right? Prices of packs drop, right? Because they're no longer being scalped at release. Interest in modern is going to start to fall, okay? And it's already happening a little bit, but it's going to really start to happen soon, right? Less people buying product to rip or to hold, right? Singles will then drop once again because of the increase or the decrease in demand. Singles will start to drop. And you could keep scaling this idea. Oh, okay, because singles are going to drop and slabs are going to drop, blah, blah, blah. And then you go into the whole proportional thing, right? Et cetera, et cetera. Okay, now let's chat about vintage, all right? And I hope you guys are enjoying it. If you're enjoying the video, listening to it in your car, thank you. Really appreciate it. But let's talk about vintage. Vintage is running rampant due to two things primarily, in my opinion. Number one, the rising culture of posting private comps that are unverified. And number two, the injection of money into the hobby. And we'll talk about that a little later. Okay, and I need to make a disclaimer, right? Here is my disclaimer, because people will take people out of context. I'm not about that kind of stuff. I am not trying to get myself in trouble with any creators or vendors. You know, I have no animosity towards any of you guys, literally zero. I can sleep at night and I'm totally fine. I do not have any beef with any of you, and I don't want to, right? I truthfully believe, you know, like that these people are, you know, truthful people. They're not making up comps, but I'm just talking about the subject because I think it's important to discuss, okay? But yeah, so let's get into the disclaimer over, right? I truthfully believe most of these comps are accurate, but let's chat, okay? And it started with Z&G. And once again, another disclaimer, no hate to Z&G. I think Z&G is an incredibly smart, resourceful, and really good person in the community. You know, I think he goes really out of his way to showcase like sold cards on eBay, on his page and such. But he kind of pioneered this aspect, I think, really recently in the last year and a half of basically making a sales post saying sold on his eBay through his consignment, right? And sold for X amount of dollars. And 99.9% of the time, these are like all-time highs, like card prices that like, wow, that card sold for that much, right? And this honestly, genius marketing move to Z&G. So hats off to you. Yeah, that's actually really smart, because these posts spread like wildfire on like Instagram, right? So someone will see like, oh my gosh, this Aquapolis Lugia just sold for, I don't know, $10,000. Reshare. And it just spreads like wildfire. And it's great in terms of like, you know, bringing people to your brand. People are going to start saying, oh, wow, this guy brings in the highest comps, you know, on auctions. I got to send my stuff to Z&G, right? And they have competitive rates, blah, blah, blah. We'll talk a little bit more about that too. And it's genius. So hats off to Z&G. I think he's a great guy. And these posts get tons of attention, right? And I got to make clear that his posts, I think he does a very good job in making sure that these are paid for posts, right? And I think if things like get refunded, he tries to clarify, like he does a good job of that. So by no means, no animosity towards him, but I'm just talking about how he started this like trend about comps essentially, right? Other accounts then they saw the success of this. So they started doing similar things, right? Some of them even started posting private sale comps, okay? And this is where it starts to get problematic, because these literally can't be verified, okay? Unless you go and ask for receipts. And most of the time they don't give you receipts, right? Not because of, you know, they're trying to be, malicious or they have bad intentions, but they don't want to give up their clients usually, right? So, and I believe these people are mostly honest, right? But when you're posting sales like this sold for 50,000 and it was private, there's no way to check, there's no way to like confirm, it's problematic. It's problematic because, like, you know, blindly believing these kind of comps on cards is very dangerous, okay? Let me kind of make an example, okay? I make a post that I sold, like, I don't know, a Jigglypuff, right, for $100. People are in shock, you know. They reshare my sale post over and over. They're like, wow, he sold it for $100. Look, Jigglypuff's worth $100. Maybe I lied about the sale. Maybe it didn't happen. Maybe, it was real, but I sold it to a rich idiot who doesn't, value money, right? Maybe I sold it to myself, right? And I'm not claiming these people do this. I got to say that again. I'm not claiming these people do this, but it could, right? maybe I sold it to myself, right? But here's where things start to really become problematic. Now suddenly someone else who has the same card can go around and tell people, hey, this card sold for $100. I'll cut you a deal and sell it to you for $90. And, the reality is that card is worth $1, right? But people will get taken advantage of. And I know this kind of stuff is happening. It promotes like predatory selling and, could be used to take advantage of people. And I'm a realistic person, right? I see the advantages of trying to post private comps because, there's stuff that like never appears for auction, really rare stuff. And it's just to help provide context. But I still feel pretty firm on my decision on the matter that I think it can be pretty negative. It can have some huge negative impacts. And the culture changed, right? Now it's like people will see these private comp sales and they will share them. Whereas before it used to be let's say you're making a deal with somebody and I don't know, let's say I'm selling a gold star Pikachu, right? If I told the buyer, right? I'm the seller. Let's say I told the buyer, oh yeah, I'm trying to get $8,000 for this. My friend sold one last week for $9,000, let's say, right? The buyer back in the day would say, I don't know. I there's no proof of that. I don't think you're lying, right? But there's no proof of that. I can't buy it at that price, right? That was what most people would respond. But I genuinely think that sentiment has changed where you can basically say oh yeah, last one sold, private sale sold for this. And now people, because of FOMO and other things, are saying, oh man, that sold for $50K. Oh, okay, I'll buy it. And it's very problematic, right? So this is where stuff gets even crazier, okay? Nobody talks about this. I've seen maybe one person talk about it, I think, and it was on a small story post. And I gotta quickly say, right, that this stuff here is the scum of the scum. If you people are doing this kind of stuff, I completely disavow. This is horrible stuff, right? And I know it happens, and I have to speak on it because I need to tell people. So when people are excited about cards, people take this very emotionally, right? They get excited, they're passionate, that they could be taken advantage of. And you need to be careful as a buyer, when you just trust information, right? So here we go. Okay, so like I mentioned before with vendors undercutting each other with buying percentages, 90%, 100%, it kind of happened similar recently with consigners, okay? Consigners have, started undercutting one another to the point where seller fees get as little as 3% on high-end items. They'll be oh yeah, you should use this, consignment company because we'll sell it for you on eBay. And instead of taking a 13% hit if you sold it yourself, you only pay 3%. No, well, that sounds like a great deal. And it is. That's a fantastic service. I think that's fantastic. But here is where the shady what starts to happen, okay? Let's say, I sell a $10,000 card through a consigner on eBay, okay? My take-home amount would be $9,700, right? Which is actually really solid. But here's where the shady stuff happens. Let's say before that sale, I own 3 copies of that card. I spend $2,500 a piece, okay? So all in, I'm $7,500 in, right, on 3 cards. I send 1 copy out to an auction, to the consigner, and I get it shilled up. I'm not saying I do this. This is screwed up stuff that I know is the Team Rocket kind of bad stuff that happens in the hobby. But I just have to speak on it, right? Because I know it's happening. But let's say I have that card shilled up, right? Or I have a buddy do it, whatever, right? Pay somebody to do it. I know that stuff happens. I have someone pay for it at $10,000, okay? I take a $300 hit from the auction fees. So, I spend $10,000 on my card, right? Take a $300 hit because of the auction fees, because you got to pay the consigner. Now my other 2 copies have a legitimate comp at $10,000, right? Turning, my $7,800 investment, so the $7,500 plus the $300 consignment fee, to $30,000, okay? That's the kind of twisted stuff that's happening right now, okay? And I'm completely and utterly denouncing that kind of behavior. It's screwed up, and to my understanding, it's illegal, okay? But it is happening, and it may be happening only a little bit, right? There's no way to really tell. I'm sure there's detectives who are really kind of looking in on this, pokey detectives, real detectives. but it's hard to tell, right? But it definitely exists. Once again, I need to like talk about like my comments on intrinsic value. I was talking a little bit about intrinsic value earlier, right? And this is how you protect yourself, right? From these kind of things. Because if you just blindly go on like Alt, right? And shout out to Alt, they have a great platform. And just look at the comp and say, oh, $10,000. Okay, I'll go buy one, $10,000. You can get burned really hard and taken advantage of. You got to be careful. Okay. So when you look at things more on an intrinsic value perspective, rather than just looking, and the culture has gotten so much like with vendors, with collectors, that I just look at my alt, I just look at my comps, and then okay, yeah, that's what it's worth. Okay. Like people don't question it anymore, which is really scary. So the only way to protect yourselves, is to pump the brakes and actually look at the card outside of the current market, conditions, and ask yourself, is it worth it? Instead of just, looking at alt and saying the last 3 sales were so-and-so, right? We also have a couple instances of like a couple cards going for like ridiculous all-time highs, and they're being set and paid for, they're paid for, they're legitimate. And these are by like ultra wealthy people, like multi-millionaires, right? These are real comps, but this is the other thing. There's things that can be replicated. There's things that can't be replicated. Like for example, the Logan Paul Illustrator sale. Do you think that sale is that can be replicated, right? Like there was a time I think on PWCC or Fanatics now, right? A couple years ago where a Charizard I think sold for like $480,000, like practically double what it was worth like at the time of the market, right? And it was a confirmed for sale, and people were like kind of like, this smells like BS, right? This doesn't seem right. This doesn't seem legit. And it was a legit sale, but you have to have that that nose. You got to have that radar, right? To be able to sniff out like this is not what its value is. And that's going back to the intrinsic value thing I was talking about, right? But back then, right, I feel like most people had that feeling of the intrinsic value and, believing what it's worth, right? And it's kind of stayed at that value, right? So, but with how vendors and like have gotten recently with cards that as long as it has like comps, it's good to go, they can end up holding, I think they can just end up holding the bag if they're not careful, right? You can't just look at comps. You can't just say, this sold for this much. Okay, I'll give you 90%. I'll give you 85%. It is a very, very, very concerning thing, right? I've pumped the brakes on my businesses, right? On my purchasing. Not because I'm so scared, crash. I'm not trying to promote any of that fear-mongering stuff, but it's because we've gotten to this point where we're not really looking at intrinsic value. We're just so concerned with, oh, it's going up, it's going up, it's going up. And you're losing almost, I feel like people are losing touch of like, like just think of like a card for a second and say, oh, this is a $30,000 card, right? It was $6,000 6 months ago. Just go to $30,000 and divide that by how much you're making an hour or something. And you're going to be like, oh, wow, that was a lot of work for that card. And you start to see like, is it worth that much? I don't know. Let me know your thoughts, guys. I'm down to have discussions with people. But finally, let's talk about like the injection of money into the market, right? So the injection of money, and I'll speed through this. It's happened before. It happened like when everyone got those stimulus checks during like COVID and a bunch of money entered the market. Now in 2024, 2025, what was that injection of money? It was the modern market. It was a whole bunch of new people, a whole bunch of people in modern, bringing in lots of money. It wasn't vintage. Like there was not like a big like growth of vintage collectors. It was the modern that really injected the market with money, right? And that money that was injected into modern slowly seeped into vintage. That's when vendors like sold inventory and then they bought up, a bunch of vintage cards on eBay. I'm talking stuff like EX era reverse holos, right? Like cards that didn't really matter. Legendary collection, PSA 10s, like random ones, right? Like Sandshrew, PSA 10 legendary collection. And if you're a Sandshrew collector, no hate towards you, right? But they were buying stuff like that out, right? Because, now they put them in their tables at Collecticon. And, this new money, that bought these, rarer, lower pop cards that before had little demand, people started purchasing them now at all-time highs. Why? Because, they could convince people it was worth it, right? Because it was proportional to like the injected money that happened in the modern market, right? So suddenly, people would be like, check out and I'm making numbers up right now, but they're like, check out my reverse hollow Kabuto. It's pop 36, right? It's $500. It's rarer than a bubble Mew, right? Like that's kind of like what started happening. And people are like, oh, wow, that Kabuto that's from the EXR. That's old. That's rare. It's 500. That's definitely a $500 card, because proportionally to this, injected price that of the modern market right now, yeah, it makes sense to me, right? And, after all, it made sense because, like, for older cards, right, to be somewhat proportional to the modern stuff, right? It makes sense, right? But, what happens when, once again, demand starts to fade, right? These cards will sit on your inventory, for long, right? How do I know this? I've worked with big inventories, multi-million-dollar inventories that has everything that you can imagine. CGC, BGS, high-end, low-end, high pop, low pop, random stuff, truly random stuff. And that stuff sits for like 12 months, 18 months. It does not sell, even if you have it for a good price. It's just not a in-demand card. The liquidity is low, okay? It's concerning. Just going back to this really quick. These cards will sit in the inventory. They start to brick, and then that paying 90%, I have $200K to spend this weekend mentality, those breaks, like, you hit the brakes pretty hard on that. It just no longer works, right? And for reference, I've had insanely cool cards in like the inventory before. Like, and I'm not talking like, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, like about a year ago, maybe less than a year ago, we had 3 Neo Discovery first edition PSA 10 Espeons, right? A pretty cool card, a nice WotC card, Espeon, the rookie card, very nice card. And at the time, they were like 2K, right? And we had them at market price, maybe a hair higher, just to, but it's negotiable, right? That's kind of how you just like price stuff, right? We had 3 of those. We had first edition Charizard, BGS 9.5, right? That's like the holy grail. Obviously, it's not a PSA 10, but it's a BGS 9.5. It's a gem mint card. How long do you think that sat in the inventory with us? And this is us marketing the cards. This is us, this is me trying to sell it on different platforms, trying to connect with buyers. It took like over a year to sell it. Over a year on cards like that. The Espeon, it was sitting on in the inventory for like 6 to 12 months. Okay. And it's not because we had it priced too high. So just to put that in perspective to you guys, because a lot of people are thinking, oh, it's just, yeah, it'll sell and it'll sell. It's things can get really slow. Okay. Long story short is, even if you have diamond hands and patience, you have to have a margin that gives you the wiggle room for market conditions. I fear a lot of people are going to be over leveraged, and they're going to become upside down on inventory. Like, they're going to start taking losses. And I do expect to see market corrections soon. I have a theory as to like when this market correction will really start to snowball and like the exact black swan event. But, just for the sake of like, I don't want weird outside forces intervening or trying to manipulate the market beyond what is already being manipulated. I prefer to keep that information and like theory. It's a theory at the end of the day, private. Okay. So long story short, I make this video because I'm just concerned for the market. The hobby is at an all-time highs. It's a great time to sell. Please be safe out there. I know a lot of people, really a lot of people who got burned hard in 2020, like losing so much value, bought at the top, sold at 50%, sold for it's crazy. So please make good decisions. And if you are in the green, just take the profits. Don't be greedy, please. But yeah, guys, that was my first video. Just wanted to chat, get stuff off my chest. It's been sitting with me for like 3 to 6 months of just like, okay, I gotta say it, But hopefully I gave you guys some more detail than you might just find on a normal video, and talked about some concepts that are, interesting to you. Hopefully you tuned in for the whole video. If you enjoyed it, just give it a like. I don't know if I'm going to be making a lot of content like this. This was just like a one-off, need to get off my chest. There was a lot of people who were actually interested in hearing my opinion on this stuff. And if you have differing opinions, that's okay. I have no animosity towards you. It's all, at the end of the day, is opinion, right? And, at one point someone will be right and one point someone will be wrong, right? And I'm happy to like chat with people who are interested. And yeah, so thank you so much, and I'll see you all next time.